Welcome to today's History Upper Ohio Valley. I'm Bob Connors, your host. We have a great guest today. My favorite guest on this program is Dolph Santorine, who is a businessman and ran for you were a candidate for West Virginia State House of Delegates.
Correct.
And an all-around great guy.
Well, I appreciate the last thing, sir.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks.
I really appreciate your being here because there's a lot of things going on in our world technologically wise. And as you know, there's going to be some changes at AT&T which will affect just about everybody who has a phone, correct?
Absolutely.
And I think that we have a lot of questions on what does this really mean, because generally people don't know what to expect here and rumors fly. So what our objective is going to be here is to try to explain this and break it down so that we can all understand what is AT&T doing. So with that, what is AT&T going digital technology? Why are they doing that?
Well, I think there's an interesting slant on this from a history standpoint, and I think that that's something that we should at least bring out and discuss. You know, since the invention of the telephone, so since the late 1800s, every year after year, there's been more and more landlines. And that trend stopped about 10 years ago. And actually there's been a decrease. And I'm finding a lot of my contemporaries, especially the younger generation, don't even consider putting in a landline because they have their cell phone.
Right.
So there's been this huge change. And we've got two information carrying networks that are both going at the same time. And one is the old publicly switched telephone network. And I did have a slide, and I hope we can end up getting that up and seeing that here in a bit.
Yeah.
That ends up showing how that works, which is, that's really the smart network, okay? Where your phone in your house ends up talking to the network, and the network takes care of all the switching. And then we have the big dumb network, and smart and dumb are maybe, those are the terms that the industry has really kind of put to the two networks. But the internet, the intelligence isn't in the internet. The intelligence is in the endpoints. And so that ends up being, a huge difference. So
Yeah.
what's going on is AT&T has looked and they said, well, St. Clairsville, I have a decreasing number of subscribers and I have less revenue.
So that means, just to keep this easy, that means that the number of people with landlines generally
Right?
is reducing.
Absolutely.
Correct. So therefore, less money coming into the company
Yes.
from landlines. Okay, go ahead.
Right. And landlines getting less and less important. But guess what? It doesn't cost AT&T, if they have to replace the aging switch that they have here in St. Clairsville, it's going to cost them the same whether they have it full or whether they have it partially full. So what they're starting to do is, instead of replacing these smart switches, okay, which is the telephone central office, they're moving everyone over to what's really considered voice over IP or voice over internet protocol. And so they have an adapter, and your call is basically routed over the internet.
Over the internet. So that's just taking them off of the copper wires.
No,
And
they're still
are they
using the
still
copper
using it?
wires. They're still using the copper wire for the backhaul. But instead of it going to, your local telephone company's central office and being switched from there, it goes out onto the internet and it takes care of the switching. What makes it unique, at least at this point, is there's still, an interface where the number you're calling may not be on VoIP or voice over internet. It may be a traditional landline or a PSTN, publicly switched telephone network. It may be on the publicly switched telephone network. So then there's an interface. But the beauty part of that is it's completely seamless to you. But at some point, all of these legacy switches go away, and we're taking care of all of our phone calls on the internet.
On the internet. What is the main difference between digital and analog?
Okay.
In simple terms. Simple minds.
Yeah, and it's actually pretty complex. And I think the simplest way to end up doing it is, telephones, especially in the past, had a very constricted bandwidth, about 3 kilohertz, 300 to 3,000 cycles per second. And, kind of sounded like this, the telephone noise, not quite as bad as a drive-through, but
nothing is as bad as the drive-through.
Yeah, that's true. There's only one thing that's worse than the drive, and I'll tell you about that in a minute with the drive-through. So, analog had that very limited bandwidth, but when things move over to the internet, if you've ever experienced, a FaceTime call or any of the online services, the audio is wonderful because it's a much wider bandwidth, and digital ends up affording you that.
And to make this a little bit simple, I think we have a video, short video, that explains digital and analog. Do we have that?
Analog and digital are two different ways of describing quantity. If you ask a fisherman how many fish he has caught, and he holds up 8 digits like this, he is describing the quantity of fish in a digital way. He's using separate individual digits to describe separate individual objects, which is fine, because this is a very clear-cut situation. You either catch 8 fish or you don't. You can't catch a little less or a little more than 8 fish. But if you ask the fisherman how big the fish was that got away, and he holds his hands up like this, he is describing the quantity of missing fish in an analog way. The distance between his hands is an analogy for the length of the fish. And this analog way of describing quantity is much more convenient than the digital way when you have to describe something that can vary continuously, given the elastic nature of the average fisherman's memory. In the world of machines, one of the commonest analog devices is a dimmer. The turning of the knob corresponds to the fading up or down of the light. It is a continuously variable device. The light can be more or less on. Contrast this with a light switch, which is the simplest digital device of all. The light is either on or off. Which brings us to that collection of on-off switches which is called a computer. Obviously itself a digital device, since it has to deal with everything in terms of binary digits. The computer's keyboard is also digital. There are lots of separate individual keys, and you either press one or you don't. But this can be awkward when you have to describe something which varies continuously, such as the movement of a little rocket ship on the screen, because you have to fragment this movement into separate units. Forward 30, right 90, forward 30, and so on. So here is where it's much better to use the analog way of representing continuous movement by means of game paddles, which relate directly to what is happening on the screen. The more you turn the paddle, the more the rocket ship turns. But there's room for both ways, of course, both analog and digital. If you want to represent reality in a smooth, continuous fashion, go analog. If you want to represent reality one little piece at a time, go digital.
So,
Okay, there we go. Nice video.
yeah, that kind of explains a little bit about what the differences are in an elementary way.
Yeah, but I think it's an important distinction. The telephone that's hanging on your wall now or in your kitchen, is generally an analog device. So what the phone company, what AT&T is doing is they're putting a device in called an ATA, which is an analog telephone adapter. And that lets your analog telephone end up talking to the digital network. And because it's a digital network, then they don't need to replace the switch, the multi-million-dollar switch in their central office. So they become pretty much an internet protocol provider. So they can provide you internet, they'll provide you your phone service, but it will be over their digital network.
So that converter will allow it to move to in your house. You're going to be just fine with it. What you're receiving or is going out just fine, even though it's analog to digital.
Correct.
There's not going to be any. It's kind of like that video said. it's both of them together.
Yeah, and right now we're kind of going through a transition. You know, you've got legacy wiring in your house, which is set up for analog, and it's probably not good enough for digital. So you stay with your analog telephones if you're going to end up doing that. And then at some point in the future, you know, that analog to digital conversion actually will happen in the phone itself instead of in an adapter in your basement.
So you'll just that'll be the next step.
And I think it's inevitable. Or, you know, like the younger generation right now doesn't understand area codes being locked to something. You know, with your old analog phone service with the central office, okay, the big smart network, you know, that phone, your phone number went to your house. And now with this digital service, if you pick up your phone and move it from place to place, your number comes with you, and it doesn't matter where you are. You know, obviously for 911 and first responders, you need to end up registering where you're actually located for emergency uses. But you're able to end up moving that with you. So it's just, you know, it's. I think there's a lot of conveniences, but at the same time, the young generation just thinks, you know, what's in an area code? This is my phone number. This is how you reach me. And it doesn't matter if I end up going to school in Columbus, Ohio, and now I'm in 614 area code, right? And then I end up taking a job in St. Louis, Missouri, and now I'm in 312. They're going to probably take their 740 number with them wherever they go.
Wherever they
you
go,
know, and they're not signing up for landlines. And to be blunt, I know a lot of people, you know, my age and older. You know, my mom would not have a landline if it wasn't for, you know, some of the, you know, just in case services that she's ends up using and the alarm system in her house. She just used her cell phone.
Well, that's great. Is there any difference between a business, if you're a small business guy, and what you have in your business, just phone-wise, and in the residence in your home? So is it
From
just the same?
From a technological standpoint, no. I don't know what they're doing from a billing standpoint right now, and it was rather unclear on that. In the bad old days, the businesses would pay a higher rate. They'd pay either a per minute rate depending on where you were located and what the phone company's tariff said. So you would pay monthly plus a per minute rate. That has been changing in recent years as well. The voice over IP services that I utilize have no additional charge for that. And you know, now with number portability, you can end up getting your number ported. So you can take what was your landline number and move it to a cell phone, or what was your landline number with AT&T and end up moving it to UMA or one of the other voice over IP providers. Yeah. So you can take your number. I mean, the number I grew up with in the house, okay, now resides on an iPhone in my mother's purse.
The same number.
The same number. and my mom and that purse are floating around in Florida as opposed to northern New Jersey. So
So do people keep their existing AT&T telephone service, or is that going to change? Can they, like, say, I have this old phone on my wall in the kitchen, I'm not taking it off, that's my phone. Are they going to be able to do that?
You can, sure, you'll be able to end up staying with, you know, your old phone hanging on the wall in your kitchen, or or the one next to your bed if you want to. Yeah. Or you can end up taking the next step, and you know, if you decide to end up going with one of the cellular providers, it'll end up going with you as well.
It'll go the same way. I know some people who are a little bit older that have a little trouble with the new technology. I have a father-in-law and a mother-in-law who are not happy at all with the cell phone business. How do they manage this? Of course, they're 92 and 90, and they never did like the
interesting story. My parents moved to Florida, and my dad immediately ended up falling in with a group of fellow World War II vets at their retirement village. And my dad's since passed, but you know, he was the first one at that table of World War II vets who all wished they were younger. with a smartphone. And when his friends ended up seeing that he was not only receiving telephone calls, but pictures and text messages from me and my sister and my brother, and pictures of grandchildren, they immediately went out and got one. And it's kind of funny, they're remarkably proficient with them.
Oh, that's
So it
good.
depends on how you want to end up attacking it. But if you choose to end up being a Luddite, yes, you can still have your analog phone on the wall in the kitchen.
You can if you want to. Is there going to be any faster service or speed with this is happening? Is it going to affect anything other than the telephone the way it normally works now? Like on my cell phone, I can sometimes send videos and sometimes not.
and remember when you used to end up calling because you had a disconnected long distance call and you'd call in to get a credit? Those, distance becomes a different thing. I think at the end of the conversion, when we're digital to digital on both ends instead of digital to analog, I think it'll end up getting better. I mean, cell phone coverage continues to improve, and we're going to see the same thing with the digital. We ended up seeing the peak of analog, 15 years ago, and it's been in decline since then. And it costs a lot of money for the phone company to end up maintaining all those wires and poles and that big, complicated switch.
Yeah.
Now, they're still going to have the wires and the poles because they still have to give you internet. They still need to provide a service, which ends up being, in effect, internet. But they won't have to maintain that big, expensive switch.
What was that? I had just got a fiber. Yeah, that we wanted to ask about fiber. Right now we have the copper wires mostly. How does that change happen when they switch to fiber, and will that happen?
I don't think where we're located. Now, eventually we'll start to see it, but I think fiber to the premises. I ended up visiting with my cousin who has a fiber to the premises or fiber to his house, and he gets unbelievably fast speeds. But, a fiber is less expensive on a per foot basis, but it's also more fragile in other ways. And it works really well in high density areas, and we're not a high density area. Yeah. So we'll probably end up seeing some mix of copper and coax, for example, Comcast. And I think in some of the downtown areas and the businesses we'll start to see fiber. But I think we're decades away from seeing fiber to the average home in Belmont County or Ohio County.
So that's probably not coming here anytime soon.
It won't be here tomorrow. I mean, where I live, I just ended up getting cable television not even a year ago. And I'm 10 minutes from downtown Wheeling.
Yeah, that's we do live in an area without that big population to support that. It's pretty hard to make it happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and a lot of people end up, Wheeling's a great community, and as is St. Clairsville, but in the global scope of things, they're small towns. We're talking 28,000 people and shrinking, and over here, St. Clairsville is 12,000 and growing. So, those are small numbers. That's less than a square mile in Columbus, Ohio.
Yeah, that makes a definite difference. How does this service that we're experiencing right now, what people are going to be having in their homes, how's it going to affect the cost for them? Are prices going to go up? Prices going to stay the same?
Prices always go up.
Well, I mean, unusually step up.
I think they're using it to leverage. This is a personal opinion. I think they're using it to try to keep the prices about where they are now.
That would seem to make sense to me, but I'm not running the shop because well, they have to pay for their operations and the people who work there and keep the power on and all the equipment they need. That all has to be factored in the price, no matter what happens. And if those things go up, the prices got to go up.
Right. And labor and insurances are not getting any less expensive. But in Ohio, you have the Public Utilities Commission of Ohio, or PUCO, and they have to, if they wish to change their prices, they need to end up submitting a rate case in order to get that done. And then there's a bureaucratic process that goes through approving that or disproving that and then throwing it out. In West Virginia, it's the Public Utilities Commission, and that's Frontier over there. And it's going to be interesting. I mean, if I walk into the Frontier Central Office or the central office here in St. Clairsville, and they're both very secure facilities, but if I were to have a tour of either one, there's equipment in there that's as old as I am. And believe me, that's ancient.
Yeah. Wow.
But I mean, you've got 50 and 60-year-old equipment that's still in place, and the main core, the actual switch, which is the brains of the operation. Yeah. I mean, those things are more than 20 years old. And you know what it's like to get a 20-year-old to work right now.
Yes, I do. I know what it's like to get an old brain to work too. That wiring keeps changing on there. So is there anything else you'd like to add to this? I think we've covered everything I can think of. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah. The thing I always want to add from a technology standpoint is if it's password protected, change your password. Just do it and do it often. I try to remember people who are not from a technology background that, every 3 months, just change your passwords. Make sure your passwords are not all the same. Okay, if I walk into your den and you've got Steelers stuff from floor to ceiling, guess what? Steelers is not a good password. And I did the same. I remember walking into a woman's office once, and she had Mickey Mouse on just about every wall, and that was her password. And it's like, no, this isn't good. You're going to get. It's just a matter of time before you get hacked.
Before somebody finds it out.
Absolutely.
So people on a password, since we're on that, the password should contain letters and numbers and possibly some other symbols.
Correct.
Maybe caps and some not caps.
I recommend at least one capital letter and at least one symbol, and you should have numbers. And my favorite thing is phrases right now.
Is what?
Phrases. So I can, a short phrase that's easy to remember, and then I'll usually add something else at the back. So it's easy for me to handle.
Yeah.
I mean, there's password generators inside of some computers. I happen to use a Mac. It'll give me a suggested completely random password, which works great if I'm on my own computer. But if I happen to be at the library or I'm somewhere else and I need to log in, and now I've got a very convoluted password. Whereas if I have this phrase, it's long enough so that it's complex, and it has the special characters and the special features.
Now, without using your phrase, we have an example of what a phrase might sound like?
Sure. And obviously there's, the whole leap numbers with games, you play with numbers. So 80 and 7 years.
Yeah.
And you can end up, there's a bunch of different ways to end up doing that. It gives you capitals, it gives you numbers, you can use the ampersand for the and now you've got, 80 and 7 years. You've got a nice password.
What if people use the first part of their password repeatedly, but they change the last half in different sources?
I recommend changing the password
the whole
completely.
thing.
Absolutely. And one of the reasons for the caps and the special characters is it makes it difficult for someone looking over your shoulder in a school or work environment to end up figuring out your password. I mean, my 6-year-old granddaughter took her about 4 times of watching me log into my phone to figure out what the password was.
Doesn't take long, does it?
It doesn't. And, and they're, for all practical purposes, digital natives. I mean, they'll grow up with nothing else. So, you learn to find your way around and monkey around in that environment.
If you have, 5 different or 6 or 7 different places with passwords or more, you got to have all that many passwords changed, or use the same one across the...
I use a different one for everyone.
Everyone.
I think I maintain right now about 16 or 17 different passwords. And I go with it. And I'm going to be blunt, and I because I think it's prudent. If I have something that doesn't affect my pocketbook, but is of interest to me, there's some forums that I log into, discussion forums primarily. I'll use the same password on 5 or 6 of those. But if it has anything to do with banking or shopping, each one gets a unique password.
Don't get you something,
Yeah, because, if for example, Walmart gets hacked, You know, I don't want them to, believe me, but if Walmart gets hacked, now my password is out. And if I'm shopping at Walmart, you can probably guess I'm shopping at Amazon and then reuse my password.
Oh, sure.
And you can probably start just, you know, doing a brute force
go right
attack
through
on
and
all
find
the
out where it
local
works.
banks until you find out where my accounts are. And then you wake up one morning and this has happened and your money's gone.
Wow.
So, you know, the online banking does a lot of good things. I worked on a project a number of years ago, and I still believe in what's called two-factor authentication. And if they end up offering you that, and you know, right now with the preponderance of cell phones, for example, you know, my username is my email. That's not very secure.
Yeah.
Then I have a password with all those things on it. And that's a better, but it's still not very good. But the best one is they send a code to my cell phone, and then I have to enter that code in order to get in. That's the second factor of authentication.
Yeah.
And that is much better and highly recommended.
Yeah, that makes pretty good sense.
And maybe I stump for it too much, but I get too many calls from friends where I think I got hacked. And, you know, in a lot of cases, it's not technological, it's social.
Yeah, they do a lot of that hacking on Facebook and Messenger and all of that.
Oh yeah, they send you an email, it looks completely legit. You go online, you put in your password, you just gave them your password. So be very wary of any email. And what you can do is don't click on the links in the email. Just go over to your browser and go to the site you know is real. And because if they sent you an email on it, it's going to be on their site as well.
Yeah, well, that's good advice. That's good advice. So hopefully we've learned a little something about that. And I think we're about done here with this.
Bob, it's always great seeing you.
Dolph, thank you. It's always a pleasure. I want you to come back. We'll come up with some other conversations.
Especially after the vice president's here this week, huh?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's going to be really nice.
I think it will be.
That's going to be really
He's
nice.
a good man.
Yeah. I think it's pretty interesting that we in this small communities that we just talked about can have people like the vice president and the president was here in this location. Mm-hmm. That's pretty cool.
Well, and I think we're fortunate to have people who make things happen in the valley, and I think that's in a lot of cases has been the difference.
Yeah, makes a big difference.
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you, my friend.
Always
we'll
good
do it
being
again.
here. Great seeing you.
Video and media technology have changed dramatically over the years. At ESV Teleproductions, we have the knowledge and the latest equipment to complete your project that will be a cut above the rest. The next time you need media produced, call the award-winning professionals in St. Clairsville, Enchanted Sound and Video, ESV Teleproductions, 740-695-5289.
And we're back. For commentary this evening, I'd like to cover something that happened recently in the news that I believe pretty much took up all of the news for about a week, and that would be the Trump and Putin summit, as it was called, and the press conference that followed it. A lot of misunderstanding and disinformation occurred on your television set, and I'm going to just cut through some of it to try to help all of us understand that what we're hearing and seeing on television today is often not anything to do with what the news really is. So first I'd like to explain what a press conference after a meeting like that is. The purpose of having it is so that the two leaders can come out in front of the cameras, meet the press, and make a little speech to show that they're cordial and that they've had a meeting and it's over, and they share the information that they've agreed to share. They have a discussion in the meeting behind closed doors, and they discuss what they're going to do, and they make whatever arrangements they've made between them, and they also talk about what they're going to share publicly, because both presidents have an audience at their home, in their home country. So they're very careful what they say when they do the press conference, and they don't get off track. That would not be a very good thing for them to do. So the media tries to trip them up with questions that they really can't answer, and that happened a lot. So that's how the press conference works, and why these presidents can't exactly say everything that went on in the meeting. That's why it's a closed-door meeting, because it's not for public consumption in either country. They make agreements that have been ferreted out by people who got all of the deals done before the two leaders even met. They just kind of sealed the deal. So in this press conference that we saw, some really weird things happened, but I'm going to talk about what happened that did not get reported, that you probably don't know about, that the media decided not to talk about. For example, newsworthy details happened and were not covered. Here's a few things that I have. Carolyn Glick is a Jerusalem Post reporter and an expert in the Middle East, and she did an excellent article outlining what this meeting had to do with Israel, Iran, and North Korea. And according to Glick, Trump came out of this a big winner at the Helsinki summit. Why? Before they met in Helsinki, I'm going to read what she said. Before they met in Helsinki, the prospect of war between Israel and Iran, that's Hezbollah, in Syria was all but a certain deal. Israel was moving toward taking Iran off of that border because it's dangerous. Trump needed to have the meeting so that he could convince Putin, who is also in Syria, not to let Iran fortify its military on the Syrian and the Israeli border. That is really, really critical. No one even talked about it. But guess what? Trump got Putin not only to allow or to not allow Iran to fortify their border, he also got Putin to go out on a press conference and tell the press that he does not want to see this, and he will not support Iran if they move soldiers into that area. Having him go public with it was decided in the private meeting, and it was enormously important and very successful for the president that he did it, because it sent a message to Iran that they're not going to get away with this. When you have America and Russia telling them, we're going to not allow you to do that. So that was a very significant win, but it got absolutely nothing in the news. But it is happened. If you want to read the transcript of that meeting, it's available, and you'll see in the transcripts where Putin did make that statement. Now, I have some other statements that Putin, I got these from the transcripts themselves so that we can see exactly what they said. Here are some statements that Putin said that never made the news, even though he said it. Quote, "The Cold War is a thing of the past. The era of acute ideological confrontation of the two countries is a thing of the remote past. It's a vestige of the past," unquote. Now, that's a pretty important thing for the Russian government to say. Now, if this were the only thing to come out of that meeting, if that's it, that all that came out of that meeting, it would be a massively successful meeting. But it wasn't the only thing, there was more. During the previous three administrations, going all the way back to Clinton, Russia has sided with North Korea and to protect their nuclear program. But during this Helsinki summit, Putin expressed publicly strong support for the American goal of denuclearizing North Korea. So why is that important? Because now a message has been sent to China, who is propping up North Korea, that Russia and the United States, two powers, would oppose any nuclear weapons in North Korea. Big message sent to China. Big message sent to Iran so far. None of this being reported in the news. Now, it would be unprecedented as far as the media. They went after President Trump expecting him to jump on Putin in the middle of that press conference and give him a piece of his mind about meddling in our elections. Well, that discussion happened behind closed doors, and the media knows that. They also know that no president of any country has ever attacked another president in a press conference after a summit and a meeting. None. Now, why would that be? The answer really is pretty simple. If Trump would have done that, all of the successes that he just had with this president that I just outlined would have been wiped out for making a fool of Putin in front of, dressing him down in front of his own people who were also watching that press conference. So the whole notion that he should have dressed him down is absurd, and every politician, regardless if it was a Republican or a Democrat or someone in the media who was on television expressing how uncomfortable they are that Trump didn't do that. That's ridiculous. It's absolutely absurd because he couldn't do it, and they all know that. It would be unprecedented if he had done that, because it's never been done before. So why would he want to mess up this historic gains that he made at the Helsinki summit? Big, important things happen. And I think it's important for us to remember that many times what we're getting on TV is just not true. I'm Bob Connors. Thank you for joining us. Today's History, Upper Ohio Valley. We'll see you next time.